Hello and welcome to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. And today we're moving into Western Europe for the first time and Switzerland. And I have Claudia here as my guest to represent Switzerland in Tasmania. And without further ado, welcome Claudia. And I'd like to start by asking you, when did you come to Tasmania and why?
I migrated in 2003 and I came here because with a spouse visa. Mm-hmm. Because in 2000 I came here as a tourist and I had some time off. I took 4 months off and I might tell a bit later why I came to Tassie. Yep. But I wanted to be in nature and I went to Bruny Island, or had this Bruny. I saw pictures in Switzerland. I found pictures of Tassie, in particular Bruny Island, in a sort of travel agency.
You have a very interesting story on how you first met your now husband.
Yeah, so I came to Australia in the first place because firstly I didn't speak any English at the time.
All right.
Or very little, but many other languages. But English was not one that I really had a good handle on it. And I had 4 months off and I wanted to travel for myself. Mm-hmm. And so I felt Australia would be a safe place to come as a woman alone.
Yeah.
And learn a bit the language. But I saw pictures, in particular about Tasmania, and I really fell in love with it. I grew up in the Swiss Alps, 2,000 meters above sea level in Mother Nature. And at the time I was living very urban and I had a longing to go back to a place with lots of nature. And that drew me. Mm-hmm. And I landed in Melbourne and because I always thought I would just want to go and then see where it takes me. But I was in Melbourne and I just was in the city again and I felt like I can't stay. I had this pull towards Tasmania. I was discouraged by the travel agent saying, oh no, don't go down there in December. They have snow. But, for a Swiss person, a bit of snow, it's nothing bad about that. So I did come down and I felt drawn to Bruny Island. I saw pictures and I did find a house-to-house sit on Bruny Island. Mm-hmm. But that led to a purchasing of a car. And I didn't want to buy a car of a car yard because you always get a bad deal. Yeah. So I spoke to people and they said, this guy, his name is Alan, he's a mechanic and he always has a couple of cars, spare cars. Why don't you call him or I can call him. This lady was actually quite liking Alan and she thought it's a good reason to ring him again. Okay. And I met Alan and he showed me a car and we had an instant connection. Right. And I sort of felt, oh my God, what's going on here? Very little English. You have to picture myself speaking sort of 4 or 5 word sentences.
And presumably he didn't speak
any other language. No. I mean, Alan is New Zealander originally, but was living in Tassie at that point for already a time. Yeah, so, and then I think he sort of drew out the car deal a little bit, that he may needs to do a little bit more work on it before I can buy it. It was a Datsun Sunny for $900.
What time was this? Like what year?
That was in 2000.
2000, okay.
Yeah. I think, was it? Yeah, 2000. I think on the December I think it was that, turn off into the
New millennium.
New millennium, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's how it started. And then, he sort of, it's funny, he would say that he realized that something went on because he did a whole engine sort of rebuild or rehaul and did much more on the car before he sold it to me, and he did it all for free. Yeah, right. Just because he wanted to really give me a really good car. At the same time, he drew out the time and he had to see me again and again and say it's not quite ready yet, And that was telling him that maybe there is something there. Yeah. And then he was very impressed that I paid cash, Swiss $900, there it is. Yeah, so that's how our story started.
So given that you had limited sort of English, how were you able to sort of develop things?
With each other. Yeah, I think he then offered me to take me for a tour around Tassie. His son, he was a single parent at the time, was away for a week. He said, I've got a week off, so I'll chauffeur you around. We often did talk or very little. Yeah. And I think he went back to work and then he spoke very funny. You know, he then noticed that he changed his spoke funny language afterwards. So it was difficult, but somehow, you know, if you know, communication is 80% is body language. And at some point we had to separate. I had to go back and we both felt like we can't breathe. I couldn't see myself to move here. I had a career in Switzerland. My husband as a single parent, had a house here, you know, established life. So we both couldn't see giving that up, and we sort of said goodbye to each other. Yeah. A few months later, he rang and I couldn't forget about him. He couldn't forget about me. And then we decided to meet once more and he came to Switzerland. Okay. 3-4 weeks. And in week 3, he proposed and I said yes, not no. Wow. And it was just sort of, I don't know, you know, you go with it. I was not that young anymore. And I think at that point, you just know it's felt right. Yeah. And then he had to come back again. And we thought, now what do we do? You know, where do we start? And it was really a little bit a flick of the coin, you know, who is coming. Because at that point, we were both ready to come. First, nobody wanted to move. Then I said, I'm coming. He said, I'm coming. Yeah. So we did flick a little bit of the coin and decided. And then Alan came to Switzerland first. So he came to Switzerland. We lived there until 2003. Okay. But that was, I don't know, I can't bring my numbers together now. We lived over a year apart to get that together. Yeah. It was quite not so easy. I actually have worked in the education system in Switzerland and even taught teachers. And then I migrated. Yeah. And that was just at the time when the teacher registration board got established. And they said, sorry, but you have to go back to university. Yeah, right. And study another 2 years at least. Become a teacher. Wow. And I did go to UTAS to do the, what's it called, English, the scoring the points and getting the right points to actually be able to study and all of that. I taught, as part of the teaching degree in Switzerland, I taught migration and intercultural education. Okay. And sort of I was a bit prepared in theory what could happen to me, or what I could experience. And a lot of people said to me, how do you take that risk? Have you got a job to go to? And I said, no. And I was sort of ready to go and sell fries at McDonald's if needed. And I think that was the attitude I came with. But it was then still a bit harder because I did, sort of went waiting. My first job was for $13 an hour or whatever. And that was quite a big reduction in salary from what I had. But in a way, I was prepared. In theory, I was prepared for it, that could happen. Yeah. And it did happen. And I then chose to sort of try to develop a new career path. That was very good, but also sometimes a bit challenging. I think one of the challenges were the house we lived in, sort of a shack, renovated type shack type, building. And I come from the Swiss Alps and, our houses are incredibly well insulated and everything is thoroughly built. And I remember we had a leaking roof, so I think at a few times, buckets everywhere because the rain was dripping in and the washing machine sort of, stopped after a few turns and you have to go and lift the lid so it works again. And even my lovely stepson, who also moved with us with Ellen to Switzerland, they came as a package. I remember he was too when we moved back in and back home, he with his washing machine, he was there one day crying, sort of saying, why is that stuff not working? In Switzerland, everything sort of works, the clock and it's everything, it's just this, more secondhand and try to make the best of what we have. So that required a bit adjustment from my part, really. And we eventually did build a new roof. But being cold in a house and stuff like that really requires a bit of adjustment. And I live today in a house that's very well built and is a bit warmer as such, which is great that we could buy that. But that was an adjustment I had to make. So I still feel a bit like I'm holidays every day when I, leave in Tassie, because we see the seal and it still evokes those feelings of, if I go down to the wharf in Hobart or whatever, and now living, close to the beach, and it's just amazing. For me, that's like holiday every day still. But my husband suffered when he was in Switzerland to not have the sea.
What part of Switzerland are you actually from?
I grew up in Heidi land. I don't know if you understand the Heidi story, who sort of grew up in the, know the Heidi story? Yeah, grew up in the Alps, and literally that's where I grew up. That's the farmers and the Alps and the snow and the goats. In a very tiny little village. Yeah. And I could put my skis on and just go and lift out of the door and up the hill. So I grew up skiing my life, lots of sport. Beautiful valley. It's called the Engadine Valley, and it's sort of close to St. Moritz, which is sort of a bit an iconic place where rich people hang out. In that valley. So that's where I grew up. My mum wrote a poem to me and said, on my 20th, the street was your home, because we were just, it was safe to be outside. And I just came home and did my schoolwork, and then I went back out again, and there were all the kids, and we just played in the village, and we had the church bell ringing at a certain time, which was a sign for us all to go home. It's a very ritualized area that I grew up in, with lots of traditions and rituals throughout the year. Cowbells to, could go on forever, but very ritualized, strong community. And mum and dad were both very community oriented. And so that would maybe all gels with me in Tassie. So the community spirit is what I'm very used to. Maybe the only difference is that in Switzerland, you sort of are in those little villages, and that's where you know everybody. You communicate. And then you go sometimes to the big city, and then you're sort of like alone. But, it took 2.5 hours drive from where I lived to sort of a bigger city like Hobart. So it was really quite rural.
So, quite isolated, I guess.
And especially in the winter sometimes, everything was snow and streets were closed and no train, and you just were locked out for a couple of days or a week or so. That was quite normal. To where in Tassie, people go more home into their rural areas, and then they're quite living by themselves. But then you come to town, and then you see everybody and greet everybody, and you bump always into somebody. So that's a bit different. So in a way, Hobart has still got that very strong community feel. And I connect to that. The community spirit is really it really makes such a difference for me even when I migrate. The fact that everybody saying hello, the fact that people just, start a conversation, even if you've never seen them before. It made me very quickly feel at home, and I could relate to that. It was very natural to me. And
so is that sort of similar behaviour that you expect in Swiss village?
In the countryside, of course. I mean, if you're in a town, more rural, urban, and you would stand in a queue at the counter in Woolworths, and someone would ask, how was your Christmas? You would sort of think, what are you doing? I don't know you. Why are you asking? To where in Tassie, that's okay to do. But in the countryside, it's more that, you greet, talk, or have chat while you climb up a mountain. Never seen each other before. That's more maybe part of it. So it really suits me.
So for people growing up in the Swiss village in a very small place, what sort of do people, when you're growing up, what do you think about future? Like, what's that people's sort of ambitions there?
I thought I would always stay there. And I think was my sort of, people were also always surprised when I moved out of the valley in a way, because I was really sort of in, and that maybe surprised me too. But, I think there is limitation of what you can do job-wise. In the area that I grew up, I was incredibly reliant on tourism. So that is another similarity to Tassie, the tourism background. Then my sort of teaching career brought me more, and I was sort of suddenly curious. I want to go and see more what's happening in other parts of the world or Switzerland. I never thought about migrating. I had never ever in my mind that I could live somewhere else. I mean, I was just only moving out of my valley family, you know. So I never had a concept of, you know, I know people who always dream about migrating or moving somewhere, you know. I don't have a really, and often people say, you know, what's better, Switzerland or Tassie? I can't say better or worse, they're just so different. Yeah. Came back from Tassie, my Tassie holiday, and went back to Switzerland. It became clear to me that I do not want to live anymore in a city. Okay. And I moved back out into a very, you know, try to find a rural, you know, through a Tassie, my new Tassie experience. It was quite challenging to find a rural place. But I had still to be able to be close to my workplaces at the time. And I did find this little village somewhere and tried to move there. And everybody said, how can you move there? You don't even know anybody there. You know? But because I'm this village person, I felt quite confident that I will very quickly pick up and build the connections, which I did. Yeah. And there was a moment where I just felt, I should be able to live in a city. You know, there was this I really struggled to do it. You know, I struggled with the busyness and I struggled with the noise and I struggled with everything. And I just felt like it can't be that I can't do this. I need to be able to do this. And I so gradually moved closer to the city. And then finally ended up really in the midst of the city, had an apartment there and had to learn to live with trams and going past all, you know, noisy and traffic and it was okay and it was handy for some things and it was a good experience and I wanted to be able to do that. Yeah. But you need to shut out your senses in a way. But then I still took some of my village habits with me. I remember I moved into this multi-level apartment and when I moved in, I went and rang on everybody's door and said, hello, I'm Claudia, I just moved in here. And I said, I'll live here for 30 years. Nobody has ever done that, you know. And that, I think, is just my nature to connect. You know, there is some foods that when I migrated at the time, 18 years ago, there was a lot of, you know, for example, good bread. You couldn't buy bread like we have in Switzerland, you know, cheeses like Switzerland. So now you get all that stuff here too. The baking is really, I think, a tradition and lots of varieties. Your little breads, they all have, you know, traditions, what you get on Sunday and what you have on Friday, you know, or could be all sorts of things. Yeah. I even started to try to bake when I came here because I learned to bake, but the flour is so different. Okay. So now, again, you can buy some flours that work, but at the time, I remember baked a special bread that I always made, and you know, it looked good, but the moment I cut it up, it just sort of crumbled and I couldn't get my head around. So the food thing is always something in that, you know, context of migrations. I've got a Swiss friend here in Switzerland, in Tassie, and there's always that moment where we spend time together and then we get on that food thing and we said, you know, how nice would it be to have a weekly or something, you know, we come up with some real Swiss food, you know, and then I get on this track and all these senses get awakened in my mouth about those different flavors I could have and don't, you know, it's better now, but there's still lots of things that they're you can only get it over there. And
so is there anything in particular that you miss that you wish you could get here?
And I don't even know what the word would be in English. So
you can say it in German.
So there's little breads like Weckli or something. I love those little breads. But there is also a thing called bread, which... It's sort of a thing that you put in sausages or I don't know. And then you cook with that in Switzerland. It's like you make different dishes with that. It's a sort of a meat thing. Okay. And I love it. And every time when I go home, I say to Mum, I would like this and that and this and that and this and that. I think what really shaped me in Switzerland, which was quite unique about Switzerland, you know, I think, and I don't know if you're aware about them, you know, we're one of the most highly democratic countries on earth. And I really truly love. And now here we go. Now I found what I maybe still can't really get, and that's the political system. So the sophistication of the democratic system in Switzerland is just amazing. And I actually studied public sector management here in Australia, and part of it was to sort of look at the political system. And then I wrote an assignment, and I wrote more about Switzerland than about Australia because I did a comparison. Because I really do. I think it has deeply shaped me. And imagine, you know, we have 7 prime ministers at any one time, and they represent the parties from right to left, and they have the chore to, you know, govern unanimously. And, for an Australian, they look at me and say, well, how's that working, But what it does, it embraces the diversity in its outset. So it's designed in a way to say, to have good policy, we actually do want the right to live views.
Yeah.
And let's really, debate this and find the best solution possible. And what it also leads to is that, of course, in Switzerland, I feel like when we have much more, forward-looking, long-term policies and strategies that are not thrown out with the baby with the bath after every election. We are much involved. So for me, it was quite, okay, here you go and elect, and then you have nothing to say for another 4 years. In Switzerland, you go every three months or whatever, you have to go to the polls and you have to vote about something, because any major legislation needs to still be run past.
There's a lot more citizen participation, isn't there?
Totally. And I think it really shaped the way I operate, think, believe, and, I work in a conflict space a lot as well.
Okay.
And I think it just comes very natural to me to learn to respect and deal with, sometimes very opposed and various point of views. Quite, a political or a global person in by nature. But then I came to Australia, and I remember I even went to Parliament House one day, and I just felt like, oh my God, this is just embarrassing.
This was in Tasmania?
I went to Canberra.
Okay.
And I just, then they explained to me, and that's maybe when you say I don't get it, that's just theatre, just there on stage and stage question time. It's part of what you do. I find it, total complete waste of time and money, and even, I've worked in a non-for-profit sector here in Tassie. Every 4 years you reinvent the wheel because every government comes in and then have to do everything new again. One thing that I did not foresee, and this maybe came to a surprise to me. At the time when I migrated, I think I still felt like my parents will stay young forever. Maybe. And I did not foresee what that growing older and aging. And I always felt a bit bad to leave my family. And my parents, never said don't go, but they also, felt like I'm moving a bit far away.
Yeah.
And, they visited because they are very young still. But now I can feel the travel starts to become a bit difficult for them. They're moving towards the 80s now, another 3 years and they will be there. And I can feel, I don't know how many more times they will come. And that distance, and now with this corona thing on top of it, it's maybe one of the most challenging things that I had to cope with since I migrated. So it will be challenging anyway that they get older and not knowing, how can you reconcile that distance. And I just would like to be there for them sometimes. I'll go and do the shopping for you, I'll help you out to do X, Y, Z. As long as I'm working here, I don't see how that, if I retired, but that's, still years away. So
and you couldn't really be further away in Tasmania, right at the other end of the world. It's just on the opposite side, And it's also financially, Mum said once, if I want to see you, I first to fork out $7,000 at least, to be able to see my daughter, and that's quite, you need to have that money first too. And two, same here, I need to. And in particular now, if I would go home now, I would just cost me a fortune. And now it's not even, we don't know when it's going to be, if possible.
No. So, and that is sort of quite difficult at the moment for the relationship between me and my parents, so that I can't say I'm coming or they come.
Is there any advice that you think will be helpful that you might recommend to new migrants who might be following your footsteps and married a local guy?
Yeah, I think it's really being, really wanting to integrate in a way, I think I struggle with people who come and then always say about how much better it was at home.
Yep, that sort of nostalgia.
And I think, so why are you here then, So for me, if people can't be open to, in a way, assimilate to a new environment and really make that your new home and make that your new, so that you can really identify yourself with it in a way. I identify as Tasmanian today because, I realise I call Switzerland home, but I call Tassie home as well. So home is for me where your heart is, and my heart is still, of course, in Switzerland as well, but my heart is in Tassie as well. And it was interesting when my husband was very sick a few years ago, and we didn't know if he would make it or not. People said to me, would you, if Alan would die, would you actually go back to Switzerland or stay? And I thought, that's an interesting question, because, he seems to be the reason for me to migrate. And I thought, it's interesting. And I thought about it. And I actually think I would choose to stay, still. So even if Alan wouldn't be anymore, for me, I do love Tassie, and I do love the life here. I do love the community here. I do love living here. So I think I would not go back. I could go back to Switzerland, but I would not choose to.